SDS in Port Huron, Michigan in the early 60s, and really had a vision of democracy. I mean, part of it, while it's seen as the font of new left politics as opposed to old Communist Party or socialist politics, really harkened back to and really saw its antecedents, not only the Eugene Debs and other socialist leaders of the 19th and 20th century, but harkened back to the ideas of Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson, that the right of people to organize and rebel, and the critical nature of permanent organization and fighting for democratic values and a citizen-directed government, where property rights did not hold sway, which, even though the conservatives would like to claim the founding fathers, in fact, if you read Jefferson or Benjamin Franklin, the only thing second only to the power of kings and dictators, the power of property was something that they really fought against and wanted to make sure that property did not hold sway, although they did only empower property-owning white men to vote at that time. But Port Huron, I mean, I think it stands as an inspiration and as a guideline. You know, SDS evolved, and 10 years later, many people involved in SDS had never read Port Huron. By that time, there was a strong Marxist faction, and you know, and it's a natural outgrowth, because I think the questions that people ended up asking by the late 1960s and the early 70s was, Port Huron said go for democracy, but I think a lot of us in SDS said, well, can you have democracy with capitalism? So many of us ended up as Marxists, as socialists, because we felt, as we can see today, that capitalism defeated and diminished the ability to have a democratic nation.
Talk about the arc of the 60s into the 70s. What happened as the got involved in the anti-war and then came to the same as split?
So what happened, you know, this is an interesting question of whether what happened in the split in SDS and the entire left.
Can you talk to me about where were you in?
So my trajectory was that by 1968, I was kind of living in Uptown, but I had started to organize high school students that, for a variety of reasons. So my focus was on organizing high school students around the city, and had been very involved in the putting together of the April 1968 anti-war march that followed the assassination of Dr. King, in which it was the first time the Chicago police attacked demonstrators, and that day 400 people were arrested, and people were, this is a very...
I've heard about this.
So,
Someone who was participating, you were there.
Yes, so I was organizing high school students and was recruited because I had a base to help organize the April 68 march. And, you know, marches in Chicago had typically been very small, 1,000 people, 1,500 people. We were not a big demonstration town. And this demonstration, for some reason, probably in the wake of the assassination of King, the escalation of the war, the Tet Offensive, drew a much broader crowd. And it was a crowd that was very diverse. There were grammar school kids with their parents, there were high school folks, there were the typical Women for Peace folks, there was the nascent SDS groupings from the various chapters, and it was a big rally. It was maybe 7,000 people, and we were all gathered in what is now Daley Plaza, right around the Picasso statue. But it was a peaceful march, and these, remember, this was before Weatherman, this is before 68, and for some reason, and this probably, you know, we were going into the fact that Daley was going to have the convention in Chicago, and it foreshadowed what happened in August, because Daley must have decided that this was an affront to his control of the city. So without provocation, and I mean really without provocation, the police decided to break up the rally They came in crowds, billy clubs. They chased people into the subways, beating them into the L cars, the subway cars underneath that plaza, and arrested 400 people. And as an organizer of the march, I didn't get arrested that day. I was put in charge of helping get everybody out of jail. And as a result of that, while I was spending my time working, organizing high school kids, I also became an organizer for the demonstrators for the '68 convention, along with Lee Weiner and Rennie and Tom, and actually was an unindicted co-conspirator. But the reaction to April, and this is kind of interesting, was that what happened in April between the killings by the police of the insurgents on the west and south side, when the city... After King's assassination, there was tremendous turmoil on the south and west sides of the city. Not the first time, it had also erupted in the summer of '66. But the police came down very hard and it killed a number of the... They were black. Killed was Puerto Rican? Puerto Rican, but some black as well. And then '68 was the west and the south side, near the area west of Racine, all the way to western along Madison and the surrounding area, and the area south of what is now I-55 near the lake.
Were the police transferring their anxiety and anger from one community to another, and then finally saw primarily a white crowd?
I think that's true. I mean, the city was on tenterhooks. People were very nervous. The police, Daley was tremendously upset, both because, obviously the uprisings after King's death were upsetting to anybody, but I think a lot of it was he wanted his city under control when he was going to show it off to the world. And so you have the blacks on the west side and the south side having an uprising, and then you have these upstart peace people who are also beginning to form a relationship with Fred Hampton and the Black Panther Party and SNCC and CORE, and I think they were transferring their anger and control issues.
Could you just go back probably, could you just restate what you just said, like what is happening with the police?
So I think that in the wake of the uprisings on the west side and south side, which had happened just a few weeks earlier, when the demonstrations happened in April, I think Daley and the police felt that it was a control issue, a specter of all these white people making common cause with African Americans who were rising up against inequality, and they could see the foreshadowing of what they feared would be, on the ground scale, revolutionary movement, closer to home, a lack of control by Daley of, quote, his city. So I think the police transferred that anger and that force and really brought it down on demonstrators that day. But let me tell you, that attitude towards total control occurred all spring, so that during the spring and summer leading up to the convention, and working with high school kids and gangs, the police, there was every night there would be curfew roundups of kids. There was really the imposition of a police state in Chicago. You couldn't stand on a corner without getting rousted by the cops, and if you didn't look right to them, the chance of being shot was really great. During the summer leading up to the convention, there was a killing of a white kid from Iowa on the street, on Wells Street, and also the shooting of a black kid named Joe Green on Wells Street. Just a lot of turmoil, and here's how it played into '68. So we get to the convention in 1968, and we get to Lincoln Park, where the demonstrators are gathering the Saturday and Sunday before the convention opens at the Hilton. And I would say that, as typical, there had been parties in the parks all summer. It was a summer of love. There had been gathering, people smoking dope, listening to music. So we get to Lincoln Park that Saturday and Sunday, and we had been prepared for trouble because of what had happened in April, and Daley's clear declaration that he controlled the city, he controlled the parks, he was not going to turn it over to demonstrators. But we were a pretty small group that first couple days, that we were 500 to 1,000 people, which was pretty typical for a demonstration, particularly at a time when people were a little fearful after April coming out. And so we get to the park, we're in the park, and it was Jean Genet spoke to us, and I think it was Ralph Brown, and some Black Panthers, and Allen Ginsberg was there. But it was a small crowd, and the yippies were there with their dope-laced brownies, and very mellow. And at 11 o'clock that Sunday night, the police decide to clear the park, and there may be 500, 1,000 of us hanging out. Allen Ginsberg's got a meditation circle going. Other people are playing music. And at 11 o'clock that night, or 10:30, whenever they decided to close the park, the fire trucks, as history recorded, came from the east behind a line of cops with billy clubs and just rolled through the park, creating the riot of Lincoln Park. What they did, I don't know if they anticipated it or not. So here you have a small demonstration that is filmed with cops attacking the shit out of demonstrators, pushing them out of the park. Young kids who were unarmed, had nothing, half of whom were stoned or mellow, had come to protest. But that night, that fight where the police attacked the demonstrators, and demonstrators eventually fought back, turned a demonstration of 1,000 into a demonstration of 20,000, because every kid who had suffered the indignities of police repression all spring long, every kid who didn't want to go to the draft, every kid who had been not allowed to wear blue jeans or a t-shirt to school, came and joined the fight. This was their moment to express their outrage at the kind of personal and political, they didn't have big politics. They had, you are fucking with me, it's my time to get back. And so the Chicago police turned a very small demonstration into a massive demonstration involving tens of thousands of people.
I was talking about there's one thing I recall, I was in the same era, is the length of the male hair and the wearing of pants.
Right.
Going from the schools. Now, how did that fit in time-wise, and were those issues brought up? The music, whether girls could wear pants, what kind of t-shirt you wore. And it's really interesting. 68 was the beginning of those issues. And in 68, which we'll talk about in another way, but in 68, you had that kind of flowering of culture. So you had new music. You had the Grateful Dead. You had the Stones coming out with music. You had the Beatles. You had a change in hairstyle. You had a questioning of rules and you had the Jefferson Airplane talk, what is reality? And a sense that who made these rules anyway, and why are they there? And so while in 68 you didn't see the full flowering of those questions of hair and dress, between January 68 and September of 68 you did. And it's interesting that you should mention that, because the next year, after the convention, going into high schools, suddenly at Lane Tech and at Lakeview, many of the big issues were dress code. I mean, there was obviously the issue of the draft, which was a serious issue, but for young people, for many of those in high school, was who got to determine what the length of your hair was, who got to determine what you wore to school. And that was actually a very little mentioned but absolutely revolutionary period in education and dress code and self-expression throughout the country. I mean,
68 is an interesting period, not only what happened with us in the convention and the killing of King, but metaphorically, I would have said that, while those of us in SPS were very cynical about Kennedy and King, remember, we thought we were living through revolution and these guys were reformists. I think for a lot of young people who were not as involved politically, they began 68 with tremendous hope. They saw Bobby Kennedy, who they believed in as an alternative to Johnson and to Nixon. They saw Martin Luther King joining issues of labor struggles, the anti-war movement. I think they really had a lot of hope for change. By the end of that summer, hope had changed to despair. King was killed, Kennedy was killed, the cities had gone up in flames. The prospect for effective dissent seemed to have been excluded with not only the beatings of the folks at the convention, but in fact by the choice of Humphrey as the nominee. So